Hi Year 1, hope you're okay. I'm here on this wet Wednesday ready to share you another story. I hope you've been enjoying the learning activities this week as part of our new topic, learning all about your local area. I've seen some lovely work, and don't forget to, in your spare time as well, to go on things like Teacher Wants to Read or Hit the Button for a bit of extra fun and some practice. I've also put lots of our favourite songs, our math songs, on the school website as well, so don't forget to have a look at those. Hope you're having lots of fun. I've got a story that I wanted to share with you today that is another story that I used to like from when I was a child. I know I say that about nearly all of the stories that I read to you, but this one was one of my favourites when I was a little girl as well. It's called Flat Stanley. Okay, this is about a little boy who lives in America, so some of the words in it might sound a bit strange, so we'll come across those, but they're words that they might use in America, which is why they might be a bit different. So here is the first page. We've got some things on his notice board. You can see all the pictures. Hey, come and look! Arthur Lambchop called from the bedroom he shared with his brother Stanley. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop cared greatly for politeness and correct speech. Hey, it's for horses, Arthur, not people, said Mrs. Lambchop. But look, said Arthur, pointing. Across Stanley's bed lay his enormous bulletin board. That's like this notice board here. It had fallen on Stanley during the night. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop hurried to lift it from the bed. But Stanley wasn't hurt. He looked very happy. What's going on here? He said cheerfully, sitting up. Heavens! Cried Mrs. Lambchop. Gosh, said Arthur, Stanley's flat. As a pancake, Mr. Lambchop said. Darndest thing I've ever seen. Mrs. Lambchop sighed and said, Let's all have breakfast, then we'll hear what Dr. Dan has to say. And look, you can see where it's come off the wall there. And he's very flat. It's gone from being 3D to 2D. In his office, Dr. Dan examined Stanley. How do you feel? He asked. I felt sort of tickly after I got up, Stanley said, but I feel fine now. Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases, said Dr. Dan. The nurses took Stanley's measurements. He was 4 feet tall and about a foot wide and half an inch thick. That's how thick he is. Being flat could be fun. Stanley enjoyed going in and out of rooms by sliding through the crack at the bottom of the door. Arthur tried it too, but he just banged his head. Being flat could be exciting. During the holidays, Stanley was invited to visit his friend Thomas in California. That's a place in America. Mr. Lambchop brought home an enormous brown paper envelope and said, Stanley, try this on for size. The envelope fitted Stanley very well, and the next morning his parents slid him into it, along with an egg salad sandwich, and posted him from the box on the corner. So he's that thin, they've put him inside an envelope. Stanley had a fine time in California. All the things he got up to, look. Thomas's family finally returned him in a beautiful white envelope that they had made themselves. They marked it airmail and wrote valuable and this end up on both sides to make sure they don't put them the wrong way. In the park one Sunday afternoon, Stanley and Arthur watched some boys flying big kites. Someday, Arthur said, I would like to have a big kite. You can fly me, Arthur, Stanley said. Come on. He gave Arthur the spool and attached the string to his arms. The spool is this here that he's holding. Then he ran across the grass to catch the wind. Up, up, up went Stanley. Arthur let out all the string and Stanley soared high above the trees. Everyone stood still to watch. But Arthur got tired of running with the empty spool, wedging it in the fork of a tree. He went off for a hot dog. He didn't notice when Stanley became tangled in the branches of the tree. Half an hour passed before Arthur heard Stanley shout and climbed up to set him free. He wasn't very pleased about that. I don't think I'd like to be left in a tree upside down. Arthur apologised over and over again that evening, but Stanley was still cross. The next morning, Stanley and Mr. Lambchop met their neighbour, Mr. O.J. Dart, director of the famous Museum of Art. Mr. Dart looked worried. Another valuable painting was stolen from the famous museum last night, he told Stanley and his father. The police suspect a gang of sneak thieves. They work at night by sneakery, which makes them very difficult to catch. Stanley had an idea. He explained it to Mr. Dart. Excellent, said Mr. Dart. We'll try your plan out tonight. That evening, in the main hall of the museum, Mr. Dart showed Stanley the most expensive painting in the world. Next to it was an empty picture frame. And now, Stanley, said Mr. Dart, it's time for your disguise. Stanley showed Mr. Dart the disguise he had bought. This is a really good one. My cowboy hat and red bandana. I'm sorry, Mr. Dart said, but we don't have cowboy pictures here. You must wear the disguise that I have chosen. Stanley could hardly speak when he saw Mr. Dart's disguise. You see why he's not happy about wearing this. I'll look like a girl, he said. But Stanley was a good sport, so he put it on. There he is in the picture. In the main hall, Stanley climbed into the empty picture frame and stood very still. Oh, I think I see what the plan is now. Very nice, said Mr. Dart, and went off to arrange the rest of their plan. Now Stanley was alone. The hall was very dark, but enough moonlight came through the windows for him to see the world's most expensive painting. Maybe the sneak thieves won't come, he thought. Then, a glow of yellow light shone suddenly in the centre of the hall. A trapdoor had opened in the floor. The sneak thieves, carrying lanterns, came up into the hall. There they are. The thieves took the world's most expensive painting off the wall. This is it, Max, said the first thief, whose name was Luther. In all this great city, there is no one to suspect us. Then Luther saw Stanley in his frame. I thought sheep girls were supposed to smile, he said. This one looks scared. Stanley managed a tiny smile. She is smiling, sort of, Max said. And what a pretty little thing she is too. That made Stanley furious. In his loudest voice he shouted, Police! Mr. Dart! The sneak thieves are here! Max, Luther whispered, I think I heard the sheep girl yell. Oh boy, yelling pictures, we both need a rest, Max whispered back. You'll get a rest all right, shouted Mr. Dart, rushing in with lots of policemen. You'll get arrested, that's what. The sneak thieves were quickly handcuffed and led away to jail. The next morning, Stanley Lambchop got a medal from the Chief of Police. You can see him in the newspaper there. The day after that, his picture was in all the newspapers. For a while, Stanley was famous. People would point him out and whisper, Over there, Agnes, Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the museum robbers, and things like that. But then people began to make fun of him. Hi, Super Skinny, they would call. That's not very nice, is it? Late one night, Arthur woke to the sound of Stanley crying. What's wrong? He said. Stanley sighed. I want to be a regular shape again, like other people. It's not fair. You're brave, Arthur said. You really are. And then Arthur had an idea. He turned on the light and ran to the big toy box in the corner. He tossed aside toy soldiers, aeroplanes and boat models. Got it, he said, holding up an old bicycle pump. I wonder what he's going to do with that. OK, Stanley said, after a moment, but take it easy. He stood with the end of the hose in his mouth, clamping his lips tight, so tightly no air could escape. Arthur began to pump. If it hurts or anything, wiggle your hand, he said. Stanley's top half began to swell. Stanley got bigger and bigger. His pyjama buttons burst off. Pop, pop, pop. I think I know what they're doing now. Soon he was all rounded out except for his right foot. He shook the foot twice and it swelled to match the other one. There stood Stanley Lambchop, as if he had never been flat at all. Thank you, Arthur, Stanley said. Thank you very much. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop came in to see what the boys were up to so late at night. George, said Mrs. Lambchop, Stanley's round again. I'm the one who did it, Arthur said. I blew him up. Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate, and several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. Oh, I love hot chocolate. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop took the brothers back into bed and turned out the light. Good night, they said. Good night, said Stanley and Arthur. Very soon all the Lambchops were asleep. And there's his new bulletin board, updated with all the things that he did when he was flat. I hope you enjoyed that story. There he was, tucked up in bed at the end. Hope you enjoyed that story, and I will see you tomorrow. Goodbye.